You are listening to the Worlding Podcast, where we explore the relationship of how we are both shaping and being shaped by our surroundings. The podcast traces interconnections by inviting each episode's guest to pass on the mic to someone who has influenced their world. And now, here's your host, dance artist Renee Schadler.
Welcome to the Worlding Podcast, where today we begin our fourth series with my guest, Diego Agujo, who is an independent researcher and multifaceted artist, creating contexts that continue practicing and investigating the relation between body and the event. Today we explore the intersection between capitalism, spirituality, and the art world, so really big topics, and attempting to blur the line between what is work and life. This is provoked especially in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic, but not only. Thanks so much for joining us, Diego.
Yes, thank you for the invitation. I'm very glad you invited me.
I first met you, Diego, in 2018 in Berlin, in a workshop you were hosting around Betraying Ambition, your 2017 book, in which you critiqued the ideological implications of ambition in the art world. It was really great, actually, to reconnect with you and feel 3 years later how much you've progressed in these ideas, especially in relation to professionalism and non-professionalism. Maybe you can speak a little bit to those ideas.
Yes, sure. So this book was born out of the need of coming clear about certain things, such as what does it mean to be an artist or a professional artist, and especially what moves artists to be or to do such a thing. And I noticed that the term ambition was always treated in a very benevolent way. So I started to be a bit suspicious because, at least for me, it had also pejorative connotation. So the book tries to also bring this other understanding of ambition and how through capitalism, ambition became something good that people should be, but also what the book is problematizing on what does it mean to be ambitious, and also bringing these questions about what moves you to make art. Is it art a job for you? Is art like a way of gaining status, making careers, success, etc.? And if not, if art is not just a professional activity for you, what else? Why do you make art? And then, I don't know, sometimes in the conversation with people, the word mission appears, like the artistic mission beyond professional demands or market demands. So I like to think in that terms, like what is the mission of art or the artist in society, but also in the personal realm. And I guess that this is something that me personally, I try also to struggle with this and always to keep in crisis the identity of an artist, that never feeling too comfortable of wearing the suit of artist, or at least the professional one. And I like this term of anartism that Marcel Duchamp made up, which is also like a way of being always about to stop being an artist or becoming an artist. So it's like this ambiguity that allows you not to feel super comfortable in the outfit of an artist. And I don't know, it's something that I like to suggest to other artists also to feel uncomfortable, or let's say, or to put in crisis the identity of artists. And then the term of dilettantism was also historically has been understood in opposition to professionalism, as if the dilettante is not as good as the professional because it's simply doing things because of hobby. And I've been also trying to bring light into this term because it is not necessarily like that. Dilettante literally means to delight oneself doing an activity. So the reason to do something is pleasure. And for me, pleasure together with death, I think that there are two of the main reasons to make art, or to venture oneself into something. So it's another term that I like to use, dilettantism.
I really love that idea of delighting oneself. I feel like at the moment, also with various stages of lockdown happening in different parts of the world, I think it's interesting how we're kind of reassessing what we find pleasure in when we have the time and the space to perhaps reflect on it, or also have access to things or not access to things, you know, like if your hobby was tennis and now you can't go to the tennis club, it kind of causes you to question what brings me pleasure and, yeah, whether it is in your work or your life. It's a very good question, I think, to keep coming back to. I did notice, Diego, in going through your practice and all the different hats you wear, that definitely this idea of being kind of a jack of all trades, it's a Australian term actually for someone that does a little bit of everything. Something that did go through, like a through line, was this investigation between body and the event. And I was really excited by this because it resonates a lot with worlding actually, and shaping and being shaped by your surroundings. Could you tell us a little bit more about that, how you're working in between the body and the event?
So I will start first with this idea of diversification of what you do or what I do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that to be anti-specialist or anti-expert is something that comes along with what I said before about not feeling comfortable wearing only one suit. And I think that this is something that it happened to me because actually I studied philosophy, but then I ended up working in the art field or contemporary dance field. And I was never feeling a philosopher, or I was never feeling like an artist. And at the same time, I was feeling both. So I think that, as everyone can have already the experience. Sometimes labels and classifications are very restrictive and limiting, especially how people approach you or see you. So I don't know, I like also to take it in a playful way, this idea of not finding one name or one word to define what one does, and actually to always try to keep it ambiguous. And yeah, I think ambiguity in itself is something of value. And the idea of body and event, I chose these terms because when I was thinking about what is my research about, because sometimes I use the word researcher or independent researcher to define what I do, because researcher for me is something very open and not necessarily related to academy, because actually this is why I put this independent first, because I'm not associated to, I'm not doing PhD, or I'm not belonging to any institution when I do my research. So I think that research in itself is an attitude in life. It's not necessarily a profession. It's a way of how do you understand being in this world and exploring, having experiences, going somehow through a process of learning is something that for me is primary. And no matter if I'm doing it through philosophy, or no matter if I'm doing it through art or through somatics, through body work, I think that at the end, the reason why I do something is because I'm interested in learning. I'm interested in arriving into new forms or new ways of being in this world or being with others in this world. And I need this constant actualization of what is my relationship with the things, with the world. And I think that the researcher has this main mission. So the event, the body, I think is more or less clear that for me is the main tool or the main place from where is the playground or the battlefield where things happen. And the event is by default what brings before and after, is this huge cut that shakes things, that bring crisis, or that somehow is change and transformation. And I think that I'm interested in this event, and also not from the perspective of how you as an artist can create this event, but also when the event is unexpectedly happening to you, and how do you react, how art can be actually a tool to inhabit or let's say navigate in the catastrophe, or navigate into the crisis, how art can serve as a navigation tool for making sense out of the event, making sense out of what apparently has no sense at all. So I think that this way of understanding art as a meaning making, or giving shape, giving form, bringing a little bit of order where there is too much chaos, for me it's like the way of understanding what art is, and how can art be beneficial for other people.
As you're talking about that, it makes me think about middling, which is a term that Erin Manning talks about, a cultural theorist based in Montreal. And it's really about this moment within the event where two worlds meet. So it can literally be this morning sun to midday sun. It can be when ice freezes. There's like this change in state, which is really when this shaping shifts into something else. And I find that point, especially within the event, incredibly interesting. And there is really this negotiation that happens. So that really resonates, actually.
Nice, yeah, transitions, liminal spaces. And yeah, and how also that's sometimes the difficulty because we get attached to the morning sun and how do we welcome another sun. So I think that the idea of how to be able also to break with one's own attachments is at stake here. Also habits, yeah, like how to welcome change in all possible domains is not that easy at all.
Absolutely, especially when things feel unstable. I know now a lot of containers, which are these fictional time sections we create, like the 9 to 5, Monday to Friday time, or project-based time, they begin to shift also as a result of the climate at the moment and the crisis that's happening with the pandemic. It's really causing us to question this temporality, like what are the containers and these frameworks that we've set up, and how do we allow them to change without resistance? I know you're doing a lot of work also and research with Qigong and Tai Chi and a lot of very ancient practices and bringing that into your research. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, so 6 years ago, I attended by chance a Qigong workshop, and from the first minute, something happened that it never happened before with any other body practice. That from the minute one, I fell in love with the practice, and I knew that we will stay forever together. And yeah, I mean, there are thousands of ways of practicing Qigong or many different traditions, and in particular, I got to know this teacher from Moscow that they belong to this tradition of Hun Yuan. It's an obscure branch of Qigong because they practice with this strange stick that becomes also your partner. And yeah, since then, what has happened basically is that it invited me to start also a research inwards towards my body, which I never did before in such a way. So it was all of a sudden as if I would have a new body. What the practice was rendering day by day, that my body was changing, was transforming through the practice, but also was giving me new approaches to what is such a thing as my body. And then it became also like a way of self-exploration, but also understand each other's bodies or someone else's body. And I think that since then, actually, I can even dare to say that I've been less interested in art or in what I was doing before. And since I went into this journey, yeah, this is taking all my motivation and my joy of doing something. And I think it's something that you can dedicate your entire life, because also the so-called learning goes very slowly, step by step, and so it's something that you also need some perseverance and to practice daily, on a daily basis, definitely. And yeah, so of course there are many other ways of exploring one's own body. In my case, what I found in this Neigong or Qigong approach is that the body has still potentially many powers. For example, what are the powers of the organs? And that was one of my last recent publications I made. Also, like to acknowledge that the brain has at least in certain culture, like is one of the organs that we train the most, and it has this kind of it becomes the dominant organ. So the question that Qigong poses is, what if we start training other organs? Maybe we don't know what are they capable of. And I think that this idea of arriving into a more like a holistic body that all the organs start to collaborate together in ways that or me personally, I didn't even experience before. It is mind-blowing, and you don't need anything else than time and your own body being available there. So in that sense, it's also very simple because you don't need devices, you don't need, you carry your body, you can practice anywhere, anytime, which I also find very interesting, that no matter where you are, what you are doing, the practice is present.
I'm thinking also how then this physical practice can link back to dissolving this line between work and life. I feel like the physical practice is giving you tools perhaps, or like a metaphor for then finding this delight in different activities. Maybe you could talk a little bit to that. How are we using these physical practices to then, or not even using, I think learning with them and moving this knowledge into different levels of our life, from this very concentrated practice to perhaps the broader organization of our day or our year?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I will say that usually there is this distinction that I think Alan Capro made in the 60s or 70s about two types of art like art and life like art. And it's art that is at the service of art, or art for the service of life. And I kind of chose the second one, that art is at the service of life. And I always ask myself, what can I do with all the things that I'm learning when I'm working, let's say more in the professional field, that they are not simply at the service of producing a piece or producing a work. How do they enter my life? And actually, I keep practicing them, but also applying them. So it's like, I don't know, imagine that you're working on a piece, you spend certain time working on that piece, it has its own research, it has its own movement quality, its own practice, its own form. So then how this can start to permeate in your life. So it's not simply at the end a result on the stage that people can see, but also it makes you to be a different person. And so this direction, not simply, everyone can say, yes, of course, this happens just as a side effect. But what I mean is purposefully taking that this as the priority, as the main purpose. So, and I think that from that perspective, ideally there will be this kind of constant awareness of what are we practicing on a daily basis since the moment that we wake up, or even during the sleeping. And also to understand what are we legitimizing with our practices, what are we legitimizing with what we do, and to become aware which worlds our practices make and produce. And I think that this requires a high level of awareness and a constant attention, and to be very alert about understanding how do we produce worlds with our actions. So I think that repetition, for example, is a key thing here, because we are what we repeatedly do, and otherwise it stays into the anecdotic realm, like a one-time event. It was fun, it was good, it was intense, but this doesn't mean that it's gonna have a continuity and it's gonna establish something. So I think that for the sake of establishing something, there is no other way but to perseverate and to understand continuity in the practice. So I guess that repetition and practices that are not simply establishing themselves as routines, because it's routine sometimes is lacking this awareness, and it's lacking also what is the potential for changing something. But I think that the practice has this awareness, and the practice has this potentiality of changing and inviting you to a process of transformation. The interesting or important thing also when we speak about worlding and what are the consequences of our action in times of crisis. So I think that this is important. And in the case of the somatic practices, I think that that's also inevitably there. What is the political dimension of the somatic practices as well?
Absolutely. And also I think how this term practice, which is a very codified word, I think that's used in art a lot for often also capitalist means, like my practice is contemporary dance, my practice is ecology. I really enjoy also thinking about these broader life practices of friendship practices, or also perhaps a practice of rhythm, like going slower, or kind of deep listening practices that also allow things to come towards you. So it's not a practice that is something I do and I push forward with, but it's also sometimes a practice of surrendering or even just noticing, like a shift of awareness. Do you find that your practices are shifting over time, especially now during COVID?
Yes, I think that in my case, if I can speak from a personal perspective, last year, the 2020, let's say the year one of COVID, it happened at the same time as my 40th birthday. And yeah, it was funny because I was turning 40. In Spanish, you say cuarenta, while at the same time you were going through this quarantine, which is also, so it was a double quarantine. And yeah, I also realized that this was surprisingly affecting me, this number, although I was never really believing that it would be the case. So I think that now, yeah, it feels that I feel ready for things that before I didn't feel ready, or all of a sudden I'm contradicting myself with things that I thought they are more state mental, or like something that I will hold on. And yeah, so in the personal level, I see that something is definitely changing, and this is why right now most of my motivation and energies are going into this level of personal life. I must confess, I feel a little bit unmotivated recently to do projects or to work, and yeah, like my energies are going more into this. Yeah, like all of a sudden I'm discovering myself anew through friendship, through love as well, and yeah, I'm kind of plunging myself and dedicating myself fully to those parts of my life, and I'm kind of going through a process of something is definitely changing, and yeah, it's exciting, I must say.
Great. I'm also excited for you. A new decade. That's amazing. It's a big achievement, I feel. I wondered, Diego, if there was a way that listeners can experience your practice. We've touched on work and life, but also more personal ideas around spirituality and Qigong and ancient forms of knowledge. Is there a way that listeners, whether they're artists or have different work or life interests, can experience physically some of the ideas we've touched on today?
Sure, I mean, I can propose one which is not necessarily connected to any tradition or any context, which, but rather I think that this belongs to, in general, any form of life, any form of being, which is self-excitement, a practice of self-touching or self-treatment, or, and in this case, I mainly use my hands. Sometimes I also use this stick, but in the case of the stick, is actually coming from a particular tradition. But for example, I will never forget that my grandmother, she never knew anything about Qigong, but every morning she will do Qigong, and I will witness her going for 45 minutes in the living room, making all these stretching exercises and touching, giving herself massages with some plants, alcohol plants that she will prepare herself. So I take my grandmother actually as a very big influence in this level, because yeah, she was in her body all the time, and somehow she always showed me what the body can do. And thanks to her, I think that I also have such a high esteem the body. And basically, I mean, what I guess that everyone has somehow already a practice of self-touching in whatever level or dimension we want. But I also like to propose it as something that you actually take your time and with curiosity and dedication, first of all, like stimulating other organs that maybe you were not even familiar that they might be there, or that they might be susceptible of being touched. And it's like also like a way of discovering the body through touch and which points, how the different points react to your touch. Do you feel pain? Do you feel pleasure? What kind of pain or what kind of pleasure? Is it a pain that you think is a good pain? Is a pain that when you touch there and you breathe or you send your breath into that point that you are touching, maybe something is opening up. So I think that to give agency to your fingers and to your hands and to trust what is the wisdom, the inherent wisdom of your hands, because I think that the hands, they carry already a lot of wisdom that comes from many years before we even were born. And I think that there is something about letting the hands decide for you that I find always very interesting. And at the end, you check yourself how do you feel, and at some point you can even become addicted. I ended up touching myself everywhere I am. So I think in this respect, I will not give instructions, but more like encourage people to take seriously this exploration and this self-touching, and to travel through the body as if it's like an open book that you didn't know that it's written. And it's like a journey somehow. And then in collaboration with breathing and how do you actually, they are in dialogue, because the places that you touch, you can also send your breath over there, and some points are stagnated, the energy is stagnated, and you slowly realize that if you do it every day, they start to open up and there are new sensations appearing, but also that you can have awareness in points that you didn't even know that you can have awareness. So at some point, the mind is not only related to the brain, but like the whole body is a huge mind. And also you start to listen to these other organs and to listen to these other body parts. They have something to tell you. So it's also like to give voice to the rest of the body, because, as I said before, I think that sometimes the brain is taking over too much.
Totally. As you're speaking, I'm following my body with my hands, and I'm at the kind of softer point underneath my knee. And I just realized I always like massage the top of my knee and the patella, the floating bone on the top of the knee. Mm-hmm. And the underside of the knee is something I often skip.
Nice.
You talked also, Diego, about the practice you were doing with the wooden stick. And I wondered, a focus of this podcast has really been on more than human worlds. So not focusing only on the human body, which obviously we know a lot about because we're moving with it and through it, but also different bodies that are perhaps a little bit further away from our sphere of consciousness, whether that be the computer or a plant, both animate and non-animate objects. And I'm curious if you could speak a little bit about the stick that you practice with, this wooden stick that moves you.
Definitely. This particular stick, well, there are two types, but mainly at some point during the practice of Qigong in the Taoist monks and places where they were practicing, they realized that if the students will hold this piece of wood in the hands, they will focus more. So at the beginning, it was also like for the purposes of holding the attention, and while you hold this stick, you concentrate better. But then things started to happen, and then you realize that the stick also starts to have its own agency and its own will. And because one of the effects of the Qigong is that you reach a state that you become so sensitive of everything that is going through your body. Let's say we can call it cosmic forces, or like things that are traversing everything, not only that are not particularly only what I call myself. So you become so sensitive to those energies that they move you. And I think that the stick is also like an amplifier of, because you also hold it in your hands in the Lao Gong point in the center of your palm, which stimulates is one of the energy gates of the body, so it stimulates the energy and the circulation of it. So let's say that the interesting moment is when you feel that your body is being moved by something else, and so the stick somehow it is also like becomes part of your body, or the other way around, or you become part of the stick, maybe more precisely. It is definitely like there is some form of unity there, or a collaboration with, in this case, a very simple object, because it's just a piece of wood that, again, you don't need to charge the battery, and almost anyone can have access to a piece of wood. So at the same time, it's also an object that you can carry with you and is all the time calling you to practice. So I also like to take this stick with me, and as if I'm taking my phone. So because I guess that, again, this allows continuity. This allows that the practice never stops.
Wonderful. Talking about the stick, it really resonates also this balance, I think. It's a really beautiful metaphor, actually, for balance, of when something has agency that is in contact with you, or you take the agency. I think it's a beautiful metaphor for this balance also that we've been kind of circulating around today with work and life, and how these questions are very present at the moment in relation to the current crisis. Thank you so much for chatting with us, Diego. I know you've lined up someone to continue this string figure. Would you introduce them to listeners, please?
Yes, so her name is Teti Lei, and besides being one of my best friends, also is a practice partner from who I have learned a lot, and I'm sure that all the listeners will be also very curious and excited about everything that she has to say.
Thank you so much. Wow, so much to digest, and I really appreciate it. Thank you, Diego.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Thank you for listening to the Worlding Podcast. Gefördert durch die Beauftragte der Bundesregierung für Kultur und Medien im Programm Neustart Kultur. Hilfsprogramm des Tanzen des Dachverband Tanz Deutschland.